Well, my name is Dustin Grote, as he said, and I'm actually not quite a doctor yet, but headed that way. I am excited to be coming to you all. Unfortunately, under the circumstances of video recording rather than live, we had a ton of trouble today getting to the NIST conference, and so apologies for that, but excited to be here, and I'll let my colleague introduce himself as well.
Hello, my name is David Knight. I'm an associate professor from Virginia Tech in engineering education, and very happy to be here today.
All right, so our intent today was to present to all of you and chat a little bit about what we're exploring in terms of transfer receptivity. So you all may be well read, hopefully you are if you're attending this conference, in the idea of how do we support transfer students to get to where we want them to go? How do we get them to bachelor's degrees? And transfer receptivity is something that that we have latched onto. It's written originally by Jane et al. This concept of how can four-year institutions really move the needle for students and get them to attain the bachelor's degree in a timely fashion, and what responsibilities four-year institutions have in that process. And so we are approaching this through kind of thinking through institutional data and trying to operationalize how this could look. I'll let David talk a little bit about the VT Nets project, which is what sort of all of this is supported by.
So this is part of a larger effort that we're working on with lots of colleagues from Virginia Tech and from Northern Virginia Community College, Virginia Western Community College, that we call VT Nets, or the Virginia Tech Network for Engineering Transfer Students. This is an STEM grant through the NSF, and so what's really great about this is that these kinds of grants provide direct scholarship support for students. In our case, we are covering community college expenses for 2 years, and then it also provides a scholarship once they get to Virginia Tech for them to finish their degree. We have a lot of experiential learning built into this program, so study abroad opportunities while students are still at community college, undergraduate research at our four-year institution, and a lot of intentional efforts to do advising from Virginia Tech to students while they're still in community college. It's been a really great partnership between faculty and staff and administrators across all three institutions. One of the goals of this, beyond focusing on our cohort groups within the STEM program, is to really understand how can four-year institutions do a better job within engineering to support transfer students. And so that's what Dustin's been really working on with this idea of transfer receptivity, thinking specifically within engineering. It's a really great opportunity in engineering to broaden participation, and that's really been the driver for us to find new pathways for students from minoritized groups to attain a bachelor's degree in engineering.
Cool, thank you. So what is transfer receptivity? The quote definition that we pulled out to kind of share with you all is an institutional commitment by a four-year college or university to provide the support needed for students to transfer successfully. And so what this work is doing is really trying to level the playing field of research so that we are focusing not just on two-year institutions, which has been the most common way to approach research on how do we support transfer, is by working and doing programs and policies and changes to the two-year institutions rather than thinking about the receiving institution, the four-year institution. And so these folks are changing that narrative, and we're excited to be a part of that narrative. In a little bit more detail, these are the 5 sort of main tenets of the framework of transfer receptivity. You can find them in their paper. This is an abbreviated version, but I wanted to pull out a few things that this research we're doing is really focusing on related to the transfer receptivity idea. And so the first one is this idea of stable accessibility. We don't really understand how in engineering transfer students are gaining access or not. And so we want to get at this idea of, is there stable accessibility for transfer students to get into engineering through the transfer pathway? Another key component of this research is that was sort of emergent, wasn't really the plan, but is to look at assessing and evaluating transfer data. And so by creating and crafting a new data set to understand engineering and transfer students in engineering, what has come of it is a really interesting look into how institutions report transfer data. And so you'll see a little bit of that in the short abbreviated version today. On a whole, we hope that this research is contributing to the call to action from Jane et al. And other folks to create an appropriate and organic framework with which we can understand transfer and how it's working or not and supporting its improvement. So, in brief, what we created was, well, what I'm working on creating, about halfway there, maybe 60% of the way there, is collecting a new data set, gathering data from the American Society for Engineering Education website, who manages a lot of the engineering program data, data from institutional websites on transfer students, and then also data from iPads, and trying to bring them together to understand engineering transfer. And in particular, the variable that we've come up with so far that is our dependent variable is this idea of transfer composition, which really is of the new incoming students at a university, how many in engineering, how many of those are transfer students versus your first time in college traditional student. And so this chart that you're looking at is a distribution of the average transfer composition across institutions in the sample. The whole sample is 193 institutions. This chart in front of you is looking at those that we have data for so far, and there are 116. And so what this chart is showing you is that the range of transfer composition, which is your percentage of transfer students that are entering engineering, ranges between 1% and 57%. And then the mean and median, your kind of middle markers, are 20% and 18%. So that means on average, your transfer student population makes up about 20% of an incoming class per year across all of these institutions in the sample. We're really excited to explore this in a bit more detail. To show, again, a few brief analyses we have conducted. We took all of the institutions and their transfer composition and broke them into quartiles to get an idea of high versus low and in the middle, and understand how institutional and policy characteristics influence whether or not institutions are high in transfer composition or not. And we wanted to bring this one forward as an example. We have many more in the full set of slides that will be shared with NIST, but in terms of land-grant institutions, believe it or not, if you are a land-grant institution, you're pretty unlikely to be in the first quartile or the highest quartile of transfer composition. And we found that to be a bit of a surprising result, meaning that perhaps land-grant institutions are missing the mark on trying to serve communities through the transfer function, at least in the engineering context. Comparing another variable, this is just a scatter plot that shows you the relationship between transfer composition and then the average percentage of engineering students that are minoritized by race or ethnicity. It excludes Asians, but all of the other groups that you would think of go in the minoritized category. And we do have a significant relationship, a positive relationship, which means that for institutions that are enrolling higher levels of minoritized students, they are also enrolling more transfer students. And so in that way, it's encouraging, and this is all in engineering, so we're finding that institutions that are really trying to move the needle for minoritized students are doing well so through the transfer function to do so. I said I would talk briefly about the transfer data and sort of what it looks like, where it comes from. So for 193 institutions, this table gives you a breakdown of the types of data that people provide publicly to analyze and understand transfer student enrollments. And so I wanted to go through these. Unfortunately, as you see here, and I'm not surprised by this, but of the 193 institutions, 80 of them didn't have any publicly available transfer data for engineering. Then you have these other group of 4 PDFs, and I grouped them together because they are static documents. It doesn't mean they're bad, it just means they're static. And so you can go through things like a university's fact book, which is a big, long document that details many things about a university, and you can find a table for 6 institutions that had transfer engineering enrollments. Others have usually by semester enrollment reports in PDF form, and you can find the table by admit type. And then the transfer student reports, there are institutions that had specific transfer student reports as well, which was encouraging. The latter two are the most critical, and those are, and sort of the most advanced, and those are actually interactive enrollment dashboards. And so we have several institutions that are doing a really nice job of providing public data through interactive enrollment dashboards as well. Certainly, one of the constraints about the data that I'm showing here that I didn't get a chance to speak to earlier is the transfer data collected routinely across the sample was only fall enrollments. And so this doesn't account for institutions that enroll students in other semesters, spring or on a rolling basis. And I've had institutions actually reply back to emails from me saying, hey, why are you only asking for fall data? Because we also enroll transfer students in the spring and in the summer, which is great. And they are right in asking that question, because that, to me, is a huge indicator of transfer receptivity, and we're not capturing it yet with these data. And so that's something that I think is really important to try and figure out how to do as we move forward. I don't know of anything else limitations-wise folks would ask. Do you have anything you can think of?
No, let me tell you, I have something
Go for it.
that could add. I think what's really important about the work that Dustin's leading to point out is that it is focused on the engineering context. There have been a lot of calls in the transfer research more broadly to focus at the field level and the discipline level, because the transfer pathway looks so different depending on whether you're coming up through engineering or business or social science or some other background. What's unique about engineering is that there's a very sequenced curriculum, and so I think it makes it really important to have strong connections between the community college context and the four-year context. And that's where we think through this work, the four-year institutions can really think about being more intentional about how they're becoming involved and what kind of transfer student support atmosphere, what kinds of policies are in place to support this population. Like I said earlier, one of the real important things to point out about engineering too that might be different from other disciplines is that this has been pointed to by multiple federal agencies as a way to broaden participation in the field. It's really important for us to figure out how we can diversify the engineering student population, and this seems to be, at least looking at the results that Dustin's just presented, one good way to go about moving the needle.
Yeah, and I guess one last note that you made me think of. The whole impetus behind this work, at least for me, is to get to a place where we can identify and really highlight the institutions that do a really excellent job with transfer in engineering, and figure out ways to showcase the work that they are doing. I think that's a longer term goal. It's not going to come out obviously in these data, and it won't come out necessarily right away, but something that it will be more nuanced than just understanding data, but data might give us a really good chance, a good starting point to understand what's happening at institutions. So.
Can I add one last disclaimer?
Yes.
Not a disclaimer to what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. We just want to thank the National Science Foundation one more time for supporting this larger research, this larger program, and thanks especially to Dr. Bev Watford from Virginia Tech serving as the principal investigator for this entire endeavor.
Thanks to you too, just to be clear. That's a good idea. And Walt, I guess a shout to co-PI Walt. Well, David and I want to thank NIST and thanks Maxwell in particular for giving us this opportunity to share at least a little bit of what we found, even though we weren't able to arrive on time today, to share with all of you. We are very excited to share the slides with the whole group of NIST, and so you'll have the full slides. You have our content information now for both David and I, and so feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to hear more. And again, this is ongoing work. This is part of my dissertation work, and so this is just the beginning, I think, of what will become hopefully a pretty cool project and really give some insights into the transfer receptivity that is occurring, and transfer composition certainly that's occurring at universities in the U.S.